Good morning, and it's so wonderful to see everyone here on a reading day. Has everybody taught your last lecture? Feeling good? Yeah? Oh, I thought I'd get a couple whoops. Yeah, okay. Well, welcome. My name is Hedel Thacker, and I work in LSA Technology Services as a learning and teaching consultant. And here we have 5 wonderful faculty who are going to be talking about their experiences with team-based learning. So we have Amy Gottfried, Steve Clark, Mika Levak, Manti, George Hoffman, and Pete Bodery. And so the first question, just to get started here, can you tell us about your course and how you use team-based learning, including why you decided to use a team-based learning approach in your course? Anybody like to start?
We're gonna go down the line? Or...
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
All right. Good morning. Now we're on. All right. Good morning. I teach Chem 230, which is like a second semester general chemistry course. And I flipped it and switched to team-based learning in the winter of 2019. And the course that I teach, the students will watch the lecture content ahead of time. I have that all recorded in videos. And then they come to class and work on problems, because that's what a lot of the class is about, is being able to take the concepts that they have learned and apply them to problems that are new or novel. And what better way to do that and practice that would be in class with your peers. So you can bounce ideas off of one another, kind of explain what you got and maybe somebody else missed, or vice versa. And then have myself and usually a GSI or two walk around the room to help answer questions and kind of put together the ideas and apply them and see them and practice them and use them. And that classroom environment is more fun and more productive to me than when I was lecturing beforehand, which is why I flipped it and went to the team-based learning format. I answer all the questions. Okay.
So I teach the second semester intro bio course, the molecular biology intro bio, and we typically have 550 students. And I'm sure I do the least amount of team-based teaching of anyone on the panel, because we're just down in that football field size room downstairs. But what we do is about 10 times during the lecture, I'll pose some questions based on what I've been talking about, and then let the students discuss it amongst themselves. And then we come back a couple minutes later and we see if there's any answers to those questions. And so it's a way more formalized way than when I used to teach, of having the students stop and consider the concepts we've been talking about. And I'd say that, there's some phones come out during that 2 minutes when I'm waiting, a lot fewer than you would think. But there are a bunch of people that go so they're actually taking advantage of that break to think about the questions that we've been posing.
I teach 2 team-based learning classes. I teach Honors 240, which is an introduction to how social scientists think. And I've been doing that for 5 years, started a year ago in a TBL classroom. And then I teach Poli-Sci 101, which is about 200 to 300 student intro class. And I taught it as an interactive class for years, beginning in the late aughts. And whenever I wanted to do any interactive stuff in Angel A or Chem 1800 or any of those big auditoria, about 5 laptops and 10 cups of coffee and 5 water bottles would always fall on the floor. And so I wanted to start using these TBL classrooms so that students would be able to work together. And I do a mix of mini lectures and then asking students to work on things. Sometimes they are writing assignments, sometimes they are just solving little problems, sometimes it's looking up stuff from the magical interwebs, sort of legitimating and licensing that kind of activity. And so I do lots of different kinds of things. I don't do the really conventional flipped classroom like Amy's doing, which works really well, but I'm not interested in content mastery, so I'm just trying to get students to do stuff and understanding that they learn best when they work with their peers.
I guess we have any. Yeah, actually, just move over, yeah. Hi, I teach a large 162 enrolled humanities course. I think there's not too many humanities courses that use TBL for the moment. It's half and half freshmen and sophomores. I backed into TBL. I was really interested in the capacity of the TBL rooms to toggle the student screen to the main screens. And I thought that was a great reporting out mechanism of group work. So I thought it would help me do group work like I've done all my life in a larger format. And I learned that team-based learning is actually quite distinct from group work. In a lot of major areas, group work, you're supposed to rotate partners every day. There's low stakes. It's just part of the participation grade, and it's easy to let one of the other people in the group do a lot of the talking. And there's very little payoff in group work. If you have a great group work exercise on Thursday, it means nothing for Monday. And TBL is the opposite in all those ways. It has a very big payoff once you launch it. Student engagement takes care of itself, and it builds from session to session. I have my students in their teams all semester, and they share about a third of their grade. So there's real accountability and real payoff for working with your team that I never found in group work, even when it was successful. Yeah.
So my course is Movement Science 110 in the School of Kinesiology, which is a required course for two of our majors. It's really an introductory course, so it's primarily first-year students. It typically is 100 to 150 students per term. We're teaching in one of the CCCB classrooms now each term, which has been great. The why for us moving to this, we were part of the foundational course initiative through CRLT. And so we really kind of blew up our course, which had previously been quite a traditional course. So we were looking for ways that we were going to really rejuvenate it. And so the team-based was something we thought was going to be really helpful for that. And we've been really happy. The part that's a little bit ironic is our first semester, because of the foundational course, we were kind of like, okay, we're going to begin this process next year. And next year ended up being fall of 2020 was our first semester of team-based learning. So if you think about fall of 2020, it was not a time where people were gathering in large groups. So it was kind of ironic. But in fact, even that first term, because of the work we had put in on the front end, of course, a lot of the work was done via Zoom, but even that went well, even in that first version of fall 2020, which was definitely the hardest, even that went well.
Thank you. I appreciate the range of experiences that you're talking about. And so let's dig in a little bit now and talk about some of the benefits of team-based learning. And I think what we all want to know about is also the challenges of team-based learning. So either or both. Anybody can speak to the benefits or challenges?
So I'll just start with one of the benefits. George already mentioned it, but I'll mention it. It was definitely what I observed as well. And that is that the students really engage by having this format. I've actually recently given some talks nationally to talk about our attendance, because our attendance is really outstanding. And it's not that high a stake. So George mentioned kind of what percentage of the grade was based on their teamwork. Ours is not a huge percentage. I'd have to do the math here to check myself, but it's not a huge percentage. But the students recognize on day one that this is the format of the class, and we spend more than 50% of our time actually in those team-based learning processes. And so they quickly recognize that there is an accounting of each day and whether they're there for that teamwork and involved. And so our attendance is greater than 90%. So in fact, where we observe the attendance to be the poorest are in students who are not first-year students, who are kind of thinking like, oh, we already figured out college and it's not going to class. And so it's really great when we have first semester freshmen, because they're like, oh, this is college. And so it's a really easy lift for us, because we're like, every day you're going to be here with these team members throughout the term. And so you want to be accountable to them. And so we do a lot of team building to really try to, make that a cohesive group. And our attendance is really outstanding. That's probably been the most remarkable piece for us.
One of the benefits, I think, is the engagement in the classroom, the noise, the activity, the just seeing students be there and participate and be excited to be there and have that accountability. I think it also, for me, rather than teaching in a lecture hall that has a back, I actually go up and I talk to all of the student groups almost every day. I don't quite get to all of them. I'm not always that good, but that way I can, get up close. And nobody can hide in the back of the room. So y'all back there could keep that distance if you wanted in a traditional lecture, but going around and so I engage, and I think students are more invested because they are talking to other people who know they're not there if they're not there, and they're talking to me and they kind of have that interaction. So that's definitely a benefit. I've seen problem solving, skills improve as well. Challenges. For me, flipping and getting all of those videos and all the content done ahead of time, there's a lot of upfront work and trying to par down the videos they're watching. All of mine are 12 and a half minutes or below. That took a minute. It doesn't all have to be done at one time. It's a very daunting task as it is, but so it took a couple of iterations to set it up. Students watch those videos and have quizzes, so just getting it set up was a big push, a big hill to climb. But once it's done, then I can take it. It does take me a little bit to kind of reset the course for the next term, but it's very much an upfront investment. And once I have the problems, my preparation is minimal, so I'm doing it again. It's definitely something you want to do more than once because there's a big investment. The first time you refine it, the second and the third time, and then once you get it underway, it kind of has a lot of momentum and it kind of builds on itself.
And while they're switching mics, I'll just put in a plug that LTC can help with that flipping process and getting those materials set up. So we're the people to come to if you are interested in this and would like help with that process.
I wanted to say something quickly about challenges. Like Pete, I've seen like consistently 85% attendance all through the semester, which has to be incentivized. So it can't just be the motivation. But then, especially now, because students have so many options for doing things remotely, that there are some students who end up disengaging, not as badly as about a year ago, but still. And when you have tables or teams that have the free riders or the people who don't come all the time, that can be a problem. And I think more generally, the team management is something worth spending time on. I usually rotate them once a semester so that if it's people who can't get along or who have total free riders or people who don't show up all the time, they at least sort of spread the pain. But I haven't found an ideal arrangement because it's hard to predict who engages and who doesn't. And that's a challenge in any kind of group work. So it's not a unique problem, but it is something worth thinking about.
Okay. I mean, I guess, is this on? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I said for me, because of the setting I have with the giant room, that I don't have the flexibility to walk around and sort of keep students engaged. And students will disengage. There'll be students when I, give them a couple minutes to reflect on something that I'm sure they're talking about what they're going to do that weekend. And so, I don't really have an answer for that. But there are definitely students who take advantage of that moment. The other thing that I noticed that when I started doing these reflection sections is a lot of students are catching up on their notes. So they kind of take advantage of that pause in the lecture outline because you're normally like talking, slides, all these details. And taking that pause, actually, a lot of students will be furiously taking notes for like a full minute into our reflection period, kind of trying to catch up on what I've been covering.
Yeah, my first response to that question is there's far more payoffs than challenges. First time I used TBL, on 2 separate occasions, students came into the room with untreated broken bones because they did not want to let their teams down. And one of the things that was really nice to see were sophomores, some of these students who may have otherwise thought that they had figured college out, kind of taking a big brother, big sister relationship towards the freshmen and helping the freshmen on their teams out. So that dynamic was very nice. But there is a huge logistic hurdle before the semester starts, setting up the teams, hand populating the teams into Canvas, then repopulating them from Canvas into other platforms. It makes the start of the semester, the days leading up to the semester, and the first days of the semester really harrowing because so much I like to really start fast. So everybody's got to be in their team and know what their team reading is and be associated with the platforms right away. The week before classes, I'm up all hours trying to get all this figured out. And it's been, the tech side of it's been difficult, learning to get Perusal to work well with Canvas teams. I piloted the new version of Perusal last year, and there must have been 6 or 7 major bugs in that launch that we worked out. It took a lot of time. So the challenges, like you said, are logistical.
Yeah, and let's talk about that part of it, the team building part, a little bit more. So, Mika and George, you talked a little bit about your approach to creating teams. Either you can start this conversation by talking a little bit more about how you're forming teams, any tools you use. Do you keep the same team throughout the semester? Do you switch them up? Does anybody else want to speak about your approach to how you create those teams?
So for us, we're using Tandem, which is developed at the Center for Academic Innovation, as our kind of team making as well as our team assignments. So there are some assignments built into Tandem to help teams work better and more effectively together. Sorry to be a teacher, but anybody familiar with Tandem? Can I see a show of hands? Are people in the room familiar? Okay, thanks. So that's what we're using. It's I think they suggested to me, this is our 1.0 version when I first started using it, which I was like, I think it's similar to what George was describing. There's some bugs along the way. So I would echo that there were troubles and that we also like to hit the ground running exactly like George described. And so the first bit of time is tough for me to try to make sure all those teams are formed on day 0 or day 1. But I think that's really something I love about this format is that on that first day, they meet their teammates. And that's what this course is, that it feels very much kind of central to what it is. So to the questions Hedel has asked, we keep our teams throughout the entire term. And our major rationale there is that the teams build some trust in each other. There are certainly, as Mika has mentioned, it's a little tricky because there are sometimes teams that are the least functional, I guess, and so you do feel for those, but we try to use Tandem. Tandem actually has them giving feedback about how their team is working. And so it kind of flags for us as the instructors, like, hey, team 21 needs your attention, and here's what's happening with their kind of team check-ins. So it helps us to kind of see what can we do. And we actually use learning assistants within our classroom as well, so that we have good support and we can kind of be to each team throughout the day, throughout each teamwork session. And so then I can talk with the learning assistant who might be helping with that table to say, hey, I'm trying to help them to do this better, just to try to help that team that is struggling to be as functional as possible. So the attendance that I mentioned on the front end is really helpful at making a team work well. If everybody's accountable, that's really a helpful piece. So I think I would have a greater struggle if our attendance wasn't high. If it was at 50%, then it would become a real struggle. So Tandem is used. We keep our teams the entire time. And then Tandem has a couple different ways to allow the teams to be set up. And so what we have focused on, since you can only do so many factors, we've primarily focused on not isolating by race, trying to make sure race is not isolated. And we have a kind of a pre-survey where they're self-identifying race and gender. And so we're trying to do our best to not isolate based on those particular factors.
So teams and team management is one of the challenges besides the prep work. I think those are the two biggest things. We rotate teams twice, so they'll be in 3 teams during the semester. Every time we go to rotate, I have teams begging me to stay in the team that they're in, and I have teams going, please change me, it's not soon enough. So you have both ends of the spectrum. I can recount anecdotally students who've met really good friends, they still study with them, and they, love that they're teams. And one of the nice things about this is they will get to meet 5 to 10 to 15 other people in the class and get to know them really well. Team management is a challenge. How much hands-on do you want to do? How much hands-off? With our teams, Everyone comes in for the day. They have to write their names on their whiteboard, because we use the whiteboards in class. That helps us to identify who they are. That way, if you're writing everybody's name down, you know who's on your team. There's no excuse for not knowing that. And everybody has a role they have to play, which is my way of saying, you know, you have a job. This is your job for that day. So everybody at least feels some responsibility, hopefully, and some kind of initiative for what they're doing for the day. Those roles include photographer. They have to submit a picture to get their attendance for the day. They include scribe, the person who writes on the board or on their tablet, which is projected on the screen. Initiator, includer, note diver, and calculator are the 6 roles that we use. And so everybody is assigned a role for the day, and they have to write that down so we can all see what that role is so they know what they're doing. Played around with some various ways of giving feedback. That's kind of where it's at the moment. We use the CATME tool, which was developed based on research on team management. It was developed at Purdue. Pluses and minuses. It doesn't talk to Canvas at all. And it'll set up teams with the idea of not isolating minorities as well. But we have to have students put information in, so I don't get the teams running day 0. I would love to, but haven't managed to figure that out yet. And that tool has pluses and minuses, kind of clunky. And if students drop the class, or you don't want to have 2 people who don't attend on the same team, because then it's lower. And so there is a little bit of micromanagement and not technology management, but personal me management of the teams. And so that's been a challenge, but CATME is an okay tool. This is something I'm still working to figure out. The best ways to manage teams with the easiest involvement on my end. So that's a work in progress.
Okay, anybody else?
I use a different tool, CATME, that's run out of Purdue. It's not terribly user-friendly, but it's pretty effective. Before the course starts, I have CATME administer a survey from students where they identify their comfort with respect to different skills. Then they're put into a skill-diverse team. And their comfort level determines or guides them towards their particular role on that team. CATME also has a peer evaluation feature, and I do that twice in the semester. It flags issues, but there are very, very few issues. And occasionally, very, very rarely, I'll address them with the student around professional communication and professional behavior, practicing that with your team. Mostly what I use those evaluations for are for writing letters of recommendation, because I can just quote directly for them about how helpful these team members were to their teammates, and how much their future peer colleagues appreciated them, having them on the team. Just having an evaluation scheduled twice in the semester, I think, is already an accountability mechanism.
That's great. So how are, other than maybe that example, how are students in your TBL courses graded?
So I use gameful learning, which means that there are multiple different types of assignment types, different paths to achievement. That's completely independent of TBL, but I think it works well with TBL. And one of the interesting things I thought about mentioning earlier about benefits. So there are a bunch of things that no student does everything, and so there are assignments that students don't do, but when they are in teams, they can get benefits. Say, for example, in my Poli-Sci 101 that just ended, essays were one option, and many students weren't writing essays, but because of the strike, I ended up making the final essay a team-based learning essay. So it's, instead of 200 things for me to grade, I just had to grade 50. And so for them to work at the tables together, even when they already were at an A, because in a gameful class you can get to an A before the semester is over, or weren't focusing on papers at all, they still work together. So they got the benefit and the collaboration from that. So how are they graded for the team-based learning stuff? This was, for example, a team grade. So So this paper, whatever the table got, everybody at that table got that, as long as they were present 3 of the 4 class sessions, because people get sick and have legitimate excuses and things like that. I graded participation at the tables. Part of the team management for me were bi-weekly group evaluations, which are basically, I use just Canvas surveys, good faith effort of filling those out, got you a number of points, and then they flagged sometimes problems. Usually students are very generous to one another, so if there are problems, they really will emerge. So the TBL stuff is basically what happens in the class gets graded in lots of different ways. And I partly used different strategies in the different classes because we know students start hating rote. On the one hand, they are sort of behaviorally conservative. They want to do the same thing. And at the same time, if it's the same thing, they get sick and tired of it. So I'd have often at the end of a class, I'd have a QR code, which was basically a big quick survey on what we had covered, and that was kind of a police action, like were they there and did they pay attention? Sometimes it was a team-based one, and the team-based ones were actually more efficient, little more work for me, but they gave me a better sense of what they did. Like even just share your notes. Like somebody, as Amy said, somebody was a scribe and took notes and put everybody's name, and I wanted to just look at the notes. Gives me a sense of whether they are getting it, whether they are participating, and what the team dynamics are. So those are the TBL aspects of my gameful grading.
So our course has a very high structure. I'm happy to share it with anyone who's interested, but I won't. I'll spare you the time walking you through the entire piece. But the cadence of every week is identical. So there's pre-work, there's a mini lecture, there's teamwork, and then there's a weekly consolidation. So the teamwork is the part that I think primarily you're asking about. So ours is similar to what Amy described. We have the students fill out a document, say what roles they're going to play on that particular day, and then at the end of that day, they're turning that document in to Canvas, and it's a Google Doc. They're opening a copy of a Google Doc effectively and filling that out for their team. And then I mentioned the learning assistant earlier. The learning assistants are the ones that are actually kind of checking that off and giving them the score. So it's quite low stakes. The actual teamwork document that's turned in is quite low stakes. So the individual assignments are the pre-work and the weekly consolidations. These teamwork assignments are not a huge piece, but they still engage the students. And what we're asking them to do is incredibly consistent with what we're going to ask them to do at the end of the week for their consolidation. So what they're working together on in that teamwork is going to be very similar to the tasks that we're asking them to individually do at the end of the week for their consolidations. So even though it's low stakes in the classroom, it's actually super relevant to the assignment they're going to be asked to individually do at the end of that week.
Challenge I had in putting grading together with TBL was my course essentially is teaching writing, and writing in my personal experience has been a kind of an individual undertaking. So I had a lot of consultations with CRLT to think through how you would grade writing in a TBL format. One of the decisions I made was to pair each team with one of the core readings throughout the semester and have them write all their papers on that reading. As a second assignment, I learned by experience not to do the first assignment as a group grade. As a second assignment, once they've launched into their topic on the core author for their team, they then pool their early results and put together a group introduction. They start with a paragraph each, and then they combine those paragraphs into a group introduction. And they do that process again at the end of the semester for a group conclusion. And then this becomes a portfolio, a team portfolio. We've moved from WordPress to Google Sites. They also illustrate this portfolio. They have the group introduction, the group conclusion with the takeaways, and then they have their individual revised and pulled together consolidated essays. And we do a gallery walk the last day of class where everybody votes on the best sites, and then there's a couple of jury prizes that the GSIs award. So there's kind of a festive atmosphere at the end of the day. And so it gives a team envelope to the writing, which is still majority-based individual grade, but there still is very much of a team feel. We have a drafting week, and then we have a revising week alternating all throughout the semester. So the revising is heavily influenced by peer review. So that still, even the individual writing, leverages the team knowledge for the individual grade. And then finally, throughout the semester, we do team quizzes in lecture that are scratch card based and raucous and fun.
All right, thank you. So what I'm hearing from all of you are these innovative teaching strategies, these innovative assignments and classroom strategies in which you are utilizing these teams. I'm wondering now about TBL spaces, so the TBL classrooms, and whether or not you teach in a team-based learning classroom, and if so, how you are leveraging that space to kind of support these activities.
I'll take that one because I have a nice story. So if you think about the fall semester, this fall I was teaching the same class with team-based learning for the 5th time in the 5th different space. So it was quite a journey. Well, actually, excuse me, the 5 years back was non-team based. That was in a more traditional lecture hall. And I waited to do the flipping the team-based learning until there was room large enough to hold the class. So I'd had my eye on it for a long time. And once the BSB was built, I was like, ooh, I fit. Can I have that? And so that's what inspired the timing of the flipping the team-based learning for me. Then, of course, there was Zoom in the breakout rooms. Then we came back, and by the time we came back to campus, we'd outgrown the BSB. The class was too big to fit in there. So I'll give a shout out to Moni, who I saw earlier, for helping it happen in Angel Hall. So I went into a more traditional lecture hall. We had GSIs pass out whiteboards and markers every day. It was harder to manage the groups and get to the groups in the middle. I had to have groups of maybe 3 or 4 because that's all you could hear. It got really loud, but we made it work. Shout out to my GSIs and to Moni and everybody who helped make that happen. And then the CCCB was done. Yay. And so moved over here into the room in the basement. And so these spaces are important as opposed to the lecture hall because you can manage the size of the groups. I can control where people are sitting so we can be in the same group for a little bit longer and have some accountability there and grade more easily kind of what they're doing. And the spaces are better for conversation. In a lecture hall, you're going to be shouting. I can get to all the groups and approach them and work with them. And I'm a huge whiteboard fan. If you ask me, the biggest thing that I hated about Zoom was the lack of the whiteboards. I'm like, please give me whiteboards and markers back. Now a lot of students have tablets and actually work on those up on the screen, but the shared writing space was one of the bigger challenges of being online. So love the team-based learning rooms, have done it without them. Want to keep using them.
So one of the things, so I'm the director of program biology, and what we did when this building opened up is our office coordinated all the applications from biology instructors. And I don't know if we use this building more than anyone else, but we use it a lot. There's a lot of classes in here. And one of the things that I would encourage anyone to do is go peek around, because there's a lot of different rooms in this building that have different properties. And even I have an instructor I was talking to, colleague, and he teaches in the lecture in the round where the students are 360 around the middle, and he just walks around with a tablet, and he's never more than a few feet away from every student in the class the way that room is structured. So whether it's a team-based learning where there's this room and there's a bunch of other rooms that are in this building, or the one in the round or the giant one downstairs, I'd encourage everyone to go take a peek and see what rooms are available in this building.
So I teach in TBL rooms now. In the fall, I taught right after Amy downstairs in 0460. which is really great. 27 tables. So this room, even though this is a brand new building, this is kind of outdated in the sense that it has the sage on a stage. So we're up here in the front, which fosters this idea that the professor or the instructor is a central figure. And we don't have the fancy space age monitors that pop out of the tables, which are pretty cool. But I actually find the whiteboards more fun and more useful. These movable whiteboards, they are very easy to use. I love tech and I love the big monitors, but especially toward the end of the semester, Moni's team is great in trying to keep it up, but the cables are fraying. At some table, the cable doesn't work. Or Jesse and I had a conversation earlier this semester. If you have a 50-minute session, you don't really want to take even the 3 minutes that it takes to make sure that everybody's got the right cable. Somebody has an right HDMI cable going and things like that. So I think that they are great, but more time than the conventional 50, if you do just a 50-minute lecture, would be helpful. And really, it's the sort of versatility of the space. So I like the downstairs room better because there is a podium, but it's in the middle, and you really kind of get dizzy, as Amy pointed out, teaching there. But if you start lecturing, but it is also really great because you are less central, and so I think it's worth it. There's a cost in another challenge, and this semester I'm teaching in 1060 BSB. And it doesn't accommodate my whole Poli-Sci 101. So I decided to make sure that our GSIs have jobs. I decided to do back-to-back. So I'm teaching twice the length of time as a sort of a trade-off. So that's not ideal, and I don't think I'll ever want to do that again, because 3 hours back-to-back, I was usually pretty fried by noon.
I have used the BSB as well as the 0460 here, and I definitely like the technology. But I'll agree on the shout out of the whiteboards. We learned as we were working in those spaces with technology that when we brought out the whiteboard, there was a new team dynamic that kind of was more active. And so I think the whiteboard, though low tech, actually provides a nice mix for teams. So if there's, for example, in most of our teamworks, we'll have a point where they are taking a picture of what they have put on the whiteboard and then inserting that into that teamwork document that I mentioned earlier. And I love the technology and I don't want to trade it out, but I do think that those whiteboards really make a difference and can be very helpful to the environment.
Thank you. And maybe that's a good segue to the next question, which is about, and Amy, you talked about having a team-based learning course in a non-team-based learning classroom. And so I wonder if you could all speak to that, about whether or not you think it's essential to be in a team-based learning classroom to conduct team-based learning activities, or are there team-based learning activities that you could easily do in any type of classroom?
I guess because I don't use a team-based learning room. So yeah. So in my class, we don't have this sort of dedicated teams. There's sort of no way the where you are presenting it's a 100-yard walk just to get down to the students. David knows what I'm talking about. But you can't, the students will sort of self-aggregate and they'll end up sitting with each other. I know who's going to sit where, because they always sit together, and the ones that like to participate during reflections and talk about the questions that I'm posing, they'll always sit together and take advantage of that. And students will swivel around, but you can do that at least some of that in a non-team-based room.
So I have taught a different course using the exact same structure, just a 1-credit course, kind of a transition into college course that uses the same team-based structures that we have in the course I've been describing today, and it was in a totally normal classroom. And everything that we're doing seems to work fine. We just don't have the monitor and some of the fancier pieces. So I think it is possible to do it. And I think part of it is the student's mindset of when this course is about teamwork, that seems to really help to make that become very efficient, that they are prepared to quickly move into that. And so as Steve mentioned, for them to swivel around, once they know, well, this is what we do, this is the time we do it, then they can quickly get into that. So I think it's worked well for me in that particular one credit course, even when we didn't have all the tech.
I would echo that. And I used it, fall 2019, I taught in Chem 1800. My Poli-Sci 101 had close to 300 students. And so I'd often do these sort of mini activities that were team-based or just talk to somebody. Sometimes I'd actually use the seating chart or the map of the room and say, this part of the room, this is your task. So it would be kind of imposed and larger than 6 student teams. And the best parts, I couldn't do this whole semester, but the best parts when I actually had the students take over. Like I literally said, somebody has to be a leader, somebody has to dedicate different jobs, and the students took over, and it was chaotic, but I think they learned much more than they would in my conventional lecture. So it works, but it also, as everybody has said, takes some planning and takes advanced work. But if we care about learning outcomes, I think it's worth it. And then your work sort of shifts. So the planning is more important than doing like lecturing the same thing you've always done for 30 years. So there are trade-offs.
And I'll add in, setting expectations is probably the most important thing, whether you're in a lecture hall or a traditional classroom, or if you're in a team-based room. I know when I went to Flip, that's what I was told. You have to explain to students why you're doing, what you're doing, how it's going to work, and you just set those ground rules from day one. And that's your most important day. It's the first day of the semester where you go in and you lay that down. No pressure. And I think that's true. So if you're in a non-conventional space, as was mentioned, if you tell students this is what we're going to do, this is the expectation, and then you hold them to doing that, they will rise to the occasion. But setting expectations no matter what is very important.
So just a quick follow-up, and anybody can answer that. So it sounds like it's a philosophical shift, and it's about communicating that philosophical shift to your students day one, or even before day one. So is that language in the syllabus? Is it an email to students? How do you communicate that to your students?
All of the above and many times. So I think communicating the expectations to students, whatever we do, is important, and we shouldn't assume that they have read the syllabus or have read it carefully. And especially if you change anything, you need to explain it. So the way we talk about it when we talk about gameful pedagogy is this idea that you need to open the hood and explain why you're doing it. You need to remind them about that. And Michigan students are all good students, but they are here partly because they've really gotten really good at playing the old bad game of school. And when you change that game, there is understandable resistance. And that resistance isn't normally distributed or evenly distributed, because especially if you're more under-resourced, and being here in the first place is more challenging, it can be hard. So thinking about the ways in which, like, what some of the cool things you're doing, to whom it might be challenging, is important. And then thinking about how you explain it. So as Pete said, when you get them, if it's their first class in college, you have an advantage, because if you get to teach in the fall and you have your first years and it's Monday morning or whenever we start and it's 8:30, you get to set the expectations. But even in those cases, I think you do need to explain and keep reminding them that here's why we're doing. And it's actually pretty helpful when we have to think about why we're doing something. So the philosophical shift, it's a shift, but I think we should be explaining our teaching philosophies however we teach.
Yeah, I think there's a philosophical communication, but just to return in a second, there's a lot of easy, simple affordances for team-based learning that don't require one of the $5 million rooms downstairs. For example, docs. I have my teams take collaborative lecture notes, and they love it. And it's just a simple thing. First day of class, they set up their doc, and it's going to be their ongoing set of notes for lectures for the rest of the semester, and they work together on that and regularly go back. I see them go back to it when they have an activity and they have to start writing or they have to start doing something. It's the first thing they go back to is that collaborative doc note-taking. One of the things I kind of borrowed from Tandem was using quick exercises. I set it up in Canvas because I don't work with Tandem, but just quick exercises early in the semester and, every once in a while throughout the semester about setting expectations for your team, explaining the goals of teamwork to students on first day and things like that. Little metacognitive exercises that are part of a grade, but simply just require that they go in, read it, and put a short answer into the text box. So that's an additional way where you can communicate some of the reasons why we're doing what we're doing in a class.
All right. If an instructor were interested in redesigning a course to align with TBL practices, what advice would you give them?
I'll jump in. Come watch, come see what it's like, see what you're getting into. I'm always love to have people come in my classroom. Doesn't bother me at all. Come in. I had lots of folks from all kinds of different places, so that's always, anyone's welcome. So come see what it's like. It's going to be a lot of hard work, but the rewards are worth it. I think it's a great investment. It's more fun to teach this way for me, and I think my students learn more. I mean, it's sort of a double benefit. And as with most things that are worth doing, they're usually hard and require some energy and some effort, and that's there. You can do it gradually and get help. There's wonderful resources. I think most of us have talked about the different help we've had from various places. I certainly received that and I'm very grateful for it. So ask for help. Don't do it on your own.
And one of the things I think is also to recognize that there are lots of dimensions on which there's variation. So I'm looking at Kai and Jesse, both of whom came to watch my class on different days this semester, and you saw two very different things. Mm-hmm. So it's not always the same, and I'm not even going to ask what you thought, but so like teaching is about developing your style and seeing the variation. We've heard like not just disciplinary or sort of content-based differences, but different approaches. It's worth seeing those and then thinking about why you want to do it, what it's for. So I love tech, so I like playing with tech, but if you don't want to do it, don't do it. So thinking about what it is that you want to do. And then you can start small, as George said. There are so many tools, so much of the sort of creative pedagogies are things that we actually have always done. We just haven't called them fancy new names. So it's not that everything we've done historically is bad. So just thinking about how to start maybe small. There are some things that I think require a big redo. And it's worth thinking about, does my strategy require that? And then spending ideally a summer doing that. But some things are just small little things you can do. Say having students work on a Google Doc. I do that a lot. I started doing that this semester. We switched to Google, and we learned that you can break Google by having 300 students be on the same Google Doc. So there are lots of things that you can do without being in a room like this.
Yeah, I think it's worth giving yourself some time to think through all the different options that TBL offers and the different ways you can play with it and model it and restructure it as you move through the semester to get the most out of it. So there is an upfront time, a summer sounds like that. That would be at least what you'd want to have to think through how you would redo a course, TBL. But the payoff, just to underscore what Amy says, being in a TBL class is much easier to teach, much more relaxing, much more fun. A lot of the issues of student engagement that are very stress-producing, anxiety-producing for me in regular classrooms where I see certain students multitasking and I have to figure out on the fly how do I approach that and deal with it. They disappear, and there's just a level of enthusiasm and excitement about the class that made me look forward to coming in and doing lecture every week. It was, very exciting part of the week for me. It wasn't stressful in ways that sometimes my much smaller classes are that aren't TBL.
All right, so we're nearing the end of this portion. Any final remarks anybody wants to make? Anything else that you wanted to share you didn't get a chance to? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. We are going to open it up to questions now. And my colleague, Elizabeth Foman, is walking around. She has a mic prepared.
I have a mic, you should be able to hear me.
Yes.
So if you have a question, I'm just gonna walk over and you can, I'm not gonna stand too close, I promise. You can go ahead and ask your question. So during COVID, I did this for the class. We did a tremendous amount of upload time to get everything started. Students loved it. They loved the breakout rooms and Zoom, the whole bit. I come back to next year because I put all that effort into it. We kept it flipped. Participation rate was wonderful, but the comments at the end of the semester, it just was too much for them. They just felt it was too much work having to watch the videos in the evening and then being in class that time. The class time, the way we did it was we didn't have a TBL room. We were in a traditional lecture hall, so there was a lot of swiveling of chairs. We just handed out cards. They were different colored cards, and they were numbered 1 through 30, or 30 different groups that you were in. And so it was just random constantly. So maybe that was part of it. But it was just too much work. We had it as extra credit. So attendance for this group stuff was extra credit, which is usually what we have our homework as. And it was worth 10% of the grade. But I don't know, did I not stay with it? Did you notice that there was a change in your students when you came back and they were just, when they had to do, did overall they feel like it was too much work in general? I don't know. So we flipped it back. Now we're back to doing more what Steve does, where we have these reflection periods. We get offered questions in class, and then they answer them during class, and then they have until later in the evening to submit all their answers to do that. So we're still trying to do something like that, but the participation rate fell off dramatically this year. So I didn't know if you're seeing trends. Did we not stay with that flip format long enough to do it? Is there something else that you think of that we could do to incentivize them?
I'd be really interested for you to establish teams and work on like rapport within the team and whether that changes their feeling towards that. And the fact that you said this is extra credit, what does the attendance look like then? Do you have a high percentage of students that are coming to do that teamwork?
When we did that, we had, I would say, high 90s.
Even though it was really extra credit.
Yeah, even though it was extra credit,
Yeah.
we still had high 90s
Okay.
of the students coming in.
I'd be really interested in just the change in dynamic by having it be a team-based, like true team, not randomly you're with these 5 people today. Because I think that can be a lot of work for some students to be like, I don't know these people, who are these people? Where we build some trust within the team and they say, okay, we know each other. Let's get started on this document.
So one thing about the class that I teach, it is a foundational class for, I'll just say it, the nursing school. So I teach general chem, organic, and biochem in one semester. So it's really content heavy. And so they're used to working. They all will eventually, I thought that was a good way to get to know their friends, because they're all going to be one unit, staying together through all their core classes and not be separated. That's why we chose to do it randomized, but maybe more stable teams would help.
I have a couple of suggestions. Number one, I get the same thing. This is more work because we have to do lectures ahead of time. And I'm like, no, really, it's not. So you have to, I started explaining that and giving students an outline for the week of, okay, so this is your time. You have one scheduled hour per week, but that means 3 hours a week outside of class for the work. And this is when you're going to be doing it. So kind of setting up the time and explaining that they're just going to spend the same amount of time just doing it in a different order or a different way. So that might be helpful. When I was teaching in a lecture hall coming back, what we did is we took pieces of colored tape and kind of had sections in there and let them form teams within the section. So if they were in the pink section, they could sit anywhere in the pink section. So they kind of mixed and mingled within that section, but they stayed in that same section. And then we rotated them to a different color. Then next time you switch to blue, and we switched groups twice. So we switched sections twice. So that might be kind of a relatively easy. We did tape off the back of the chairs. Thank you to Moni again for doing that or helping me get that done. And so that might be just a different way to kind of manage it so it's not quite so random. It doesn't quite build the same teams in, but I have heard the same complaint. Coming back from COVID, yes, the students are different, but they can still do it and will still do it.
Yeah, hi. So one thing that I would love to hear more about, we've heard a lot about how students work within teams. Do you have a report out session, and how does that work? And I will just say the reason I'm here is because there was a classroom crunch, and I was given the choice between teaching my seminar at 8:30 in the morning or teaching in a TBL room. So I thought I would try the TBL room because in my 25-person upper division seminar, they do great in the small groups. Like, you can't shut them up and the room is cacophonous. But once you get to the report out session, it's really hard to get anyone to say anything. So I'm wondering if you can talk about how you've used report out and in the team-based environment, and what you found has worked, and what maybe some of the warnings you might give me.
That's something I've thought about a lot, and there are a couple of different strategies. There's nothing ideal. So in 0460, that's 27 tables. If the class is full, you cannot debrief every table. In 1060 BSB, I had 21 of the 23 tables full. So you can't do that because then it ends up becoming rote, or you literally don't have the time. I've done a couple of times, I've started using random number generators. So I have explicitly, I display on one of the monitors, Google's random number generator. I put between 1 and 21, and okay, that table reports out, and I tell them in advance. So that's a bit of a sort of peer pressure incentive for them to do work, and we still get something. The other is that maybe the reporting out is some of the documents that they generate that Pete and George have talked about, that in fact there is no reporting out in the room, but there is accountability for the work, and it is collective work, and in many cases cumulative work down the line, so it doesn't feel wasted effort. Because it is true that group work or team-based work that doesn't get acknowledged and debriefed somehow or accounted for somehow, they begin resenting for good reasons. So those are some of the strategies that I've used.
A couple more things I've tried. So my teams are associated with one of the core authors, and when we get to that author in lecture, I publicly acknowledge the teams that are the experts on the author, and will invite them to respond to questions throughout the lecture as the experts. I've learned from experience to feed them the questions the weekend before, so they're a little bit choreographed, the answers, but they really enjoy listening to each other during the lecture, listening to the teams that have been working all semester on the author. That's the kind of high end of prearranged reporting out. But one thing I do very regularly is I have my teams in my big class, they're all clustered together with their GSIs, so I just have them report out to the GSI who's sitting in the middle of those three teams. And that's a pretty efficient way. So they're reporting out to the GSI, not to me. And then I do use the screen toggle feature. Sometimes I just use it in the background. So they're working on some team task, and I walk around and I see who's furthest along or who's added something new to their team monitor, and I'll just go back to the podium and I'll toggle it to the big screens. And they kind of enjoy waiting for their turn to appear on the big screen and seeing what other people are doing and kind of chuckling back and forth. So that's a very low key way of doing reporting out. And then, the gallery walk I spoke about earlier is a way of having reporting out be the way we end the whole semester too.
I'll just echo that we also use random number generation. We also use that toggle to allow for, during the debrief, to allow student groups to see what did table 21 come up with. And then we can show that on the overhead screens. That's a nice, fun way, engaging way. I think we can have them kind of tell us about it and everybody can see it on the screens in the space. The only other thing I'll add is that one of the roles that we have on the front end is spokesperson. And so that is the person then that should be expecting to be the person to report out if the random number generator says table 23 needs to speak. There's a person at that table who is written in as the spokesperson for that group. And so it at least kind of elevates their expectation of something coming their way.
Thank you. Yeah. So I have a question that you might be able to reduce my anxiety. So I'm very anxious about students who come with accommodation letters. I have many, more and more every semester. Maybe other people have the same experience. So those people with visa and all that, have you had experience with people who come with visa or neurodiverse students and so on, and what was your approach? And do you try to resolve it as a team or in the course of the semester, or just say your solution to this? So I'm very concerned about this because I'm going to teach one.
It's something that I think we all see a lot increasingly. One of the most interesting solutions I've seen is no solution on my part, but it's the incredible generosity and inclusiveness of our students these days. So I've had some sort of visible neurodiverse issues, the things that give me most pause, and I've had several students like this semester, and they are perfectly accommodated by their teammates. Now, of course, this kind of laissez-faire maybe sounds a little irresponsible, but basically I haven't had to intervene at all. So that's one of those things. But my honors class is called wellness, so we talk a lot about disability as one of the themes. So we'll talk about that, not talk about as in putting people who need accommodations on the spot, but just thinking about what it means to be in an inclusive setting in general. So I think addressing those substantively, if that's possible, given the substance of your course, can be helpful. But I've also just not had to deal with it. Some physical disabilities also sometimes require some accommodations. For example, wheelchair users, or people who need different heightened table levels, which 0460, for example, has, if needed. So I think that we are a little more prepared to do that than we were before, both attitudinally and then physically and logistically. That's my experience. So it's kind of a non-answer.
I have one student in mind. As you asked it, I was thinking, well, the majority of mine are 1.5 times for exams, and so those types of things are not so relevant, right? But the one that I had this term, which was new, is I had a student that had a condition that they would have occasional flare-ups, and so the accommodation was to provide an extra 48 hours on assignments, and because of the high structure, we have assignments like regular. So I was like, wow. Like to kind of go throughout the entire term and just give a 48-hour window would be a lot. And so I just had a conversation with the student. I asked them to come to office hours, and we talked about the accommodation. I talked about the structure of the course, and I just had a conversation about what do you think, how can I help you without having to change every one of your assignment due dates? What can we do for me to help meet this accommodation with the structure of this course? And that has gone very well. To kind of say, I want to help make this accommodation happen. Here's the structure of the course. What do you think we can do to make it work?
Hi, I'm Pete Washabaugh. I'm a professor in aerospace engineering, and I've wrestled with group work and teamwork for a long time. And I thought I knew what most of you were saying, but then I realized I wasn't quite sure. So I've taught groups at different scales and teams at different scales. And then I realized I wasn't quite sure if many of you interchange the word group and team. And I'm wondering if you distinguish between group and team. And if so, what is that distinction? And a related question, which is related to the group and team, whether you're using a group or a team, is how have you changed the course content or homework or assignments based on the teaming arrangements? Thank you.
Well, I think that's the biggest challenge of communicating the value of team-based learning across campus. A lot of my colleagues say, oh, yeah, I do group work. I already do that. And I think groups and teams are radically different. Like I said at the beginning, groups, best practice, you're supposed to rotate partners throughout the week and throughout the month and semester. Teams, they have real buy-in with their team. The groups are one-offs. They're low stakes. The teams are high stakes. You share your grade. You're working together towards a final project for which you all bear responsibility. The resulting dynamic is completely different, and the experience of working with groups, from my end, feels nothing like working with teams.
Hi all, thanks for such a great panel. And Pete, I'm really realizing that I should have just sat and stayed in the room at least once this term. So I taught before Pete at the 9 o'clock hour in 0460 this term. And one thing that I really wanted to do and never managed to make happen in my first time in a TBL room and doing TBL learning was whiteboarding. And so Amy and Pete and any of you who've used more whiteboard activities, can you give us one or two concrete examples of this is the kind of question I would ask and get students jumping up and doing stuff? Because I actually do that in my smaller classes, but couldn't figure it out in this one.
So as a chemistry, more quantitative-based course, each class session, each 50-minute class section, we have approximately 4 activities that the students are responsible for doing. And most of those are opportunities to apply what they've learned. So there's an explain, a brainstorm, a quantify, where you're looking for a number for an answer. I love drawing ones. That's fantastic. Sketch out the graph. What would this look like? And things like that. So there's a variety of kinds of problems, but the problems go up on the whiteboard. And I quite frankly walk around the room with 2 markers, and there's a whiteboard next to every table, and I will, when I talk to them, I can't talk and teach chemistry without drawing pictures or equations or something. So I'm notorious for walking around with that. A lot of them do use the tablets now and kind of have one scribe kind of right on that. And I do have to go around and encourage them. You need a common workspace. You need to have something where everybody knows where everybody else is talking about. And I'm okay if you use your tablet, that's cool, great technology, but the whiteboard is there if you need it, and every group has access to that and the markers and drawing. So our activities are specific problems they solve. The answer, there's, an answer that they're looking for or a description, but mine's much more quantitative, and that does lend itself to it very well. So I do have that advantage.
I try to use them for creative tasks. So I teach political theory, which is humanities, slumming in a social science discipline, and then my honors class, which is sort of introduction to how social scientists think. And in that class, I've asked students to sort of creatively brainstorm, create a diagram that explains the relationship between the Dunning-Kruger effect and imposter phenomenon. Dunning-Kruger effect is the thought that the less competent you are, the more competent you think you are, and then relate that to imposter syndrome, which they end up drawing really cool things. And the other thing I've had them do in that class is, for example, a year ago when CRT, critical race theory, was highly controversial in some states, I said, do a diagram of critical race theory, whatever that means for you. And then in my political theory class, it's like draw Rousseau's social contract, or what does the state of nature look like for John Locke, or things like that. And so it's explicitly creative, things that in chemistry we kind of know what we're hoping to see in the diagrams, and in these classes I don't know what they're coming up with, which makes it more interesting for me.
So for us, similar, I think, but we would be, anything where brainstorming would be relevant. So for example, as this is an introductory course, we're saying, hey, we want you to now design an experiment to answer this question. So draw it out for us. What's this experiment going to look like? And so it's highly dependent on who's in the group, but it allows for people to kind of see it and to contribute. So any space where the students can be individually contributing and trying to give us a depiction of this, it allows us to then be able to see it more clearly as we're walking around the room and give them feedback as well.
One cool trick is if I teach with an iPad and I write on that, you can go around. If they're doing whiteboards, you can't project the whiteboards, but you can snap a picture with your iPad and then project that. So if you want to share their work on a whiteboard, that's a pretty easy way to do that.
I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how you use GSIs or don't use GSIs in your class. And the background to this is in our department, there have been some group or team-based classes, and sometimes when different GSIs have had kind of control over different groups, there's been student feedback that they're getting like different messages, or they're being taught by like different levels of GSI. So I'd just be curious how you use GSIs in your courses.
One thing is you have to, as with any person, if you want them to do something, you need to show them and tell them explicitly what you want them to do. So there's some more training involved, and it takes a lot. I think some GSIs are very uncomfortable because I have them walk around the room and I try to model this for people, and I'm pretty good at inserting myself in the group and say, hey, what's up? What are we doing? Where are you working at? What problem are you working on? What questions do you have? And I've gotten very comfortable doing that, but that's not comfortable for everybody. So trying to help them encourage GSIs and help them to grow in terms of doing that, kind of being able to insert yourself into a group that's already in progress, or to know when to back off from the group, or kind of what to look for. So the GSIs are there if there's questions. This semester, a few of them have done a really great job getting engaged, and students will flag them down or will raise their hand. And, if there's a question, how do you call for help? And so that hand goes up. I'm on that corner of the room. The hand goes up over here. A GSI is there to see it and kind of walk around and to monitor that, what's going on. It depends on the number of groups, how many kind of you manage, or how many you might need, or.
I mean, consistency across GSI is always a really big deal, right? Especially like in our classes, we have like our intro bio lab has 23 GSIs. So how do you keep that consistent? And I think what we've done in biology is all of our large classes do a lot more GSI prep. So we give them a lot more resources. So they all have the same resources. We all have a meeting with them before, here's what we're covering this week, here's what your role is. They run small group active learning exercises on their own. And so it's been GSI preparation, I think, that sort of evened some of those things out.
For us, this last year was the first time we introduced a GSI to our course, and we actually had them manage a subset of the tables. So we had instructors, so we co-instruct this course, so I had my 7 tables, my co-instructors had 7 tables, and the GSI had 4 tables that they managed. And that was an introduction to them in this format. And then this term, as the class was smaller, we actually had the GSI step up into one of the instructor roles. So they were also leading some of the material. First time around, they were just helping to work with the students at tables. Second time around, we introduced them then as one of the co-instructors. So that's kind of what we've done to integrate them into this same space.
I now sympathize with you team-based learning people having to walk across a huge room.
Okay. I want to go back to the question of neurodiversity, because this is something that I'm sensitive to and struggle with in the same ways. I think it was probably true that students here are sensitive and generous in many of these ways. But this is also in a wellness class. And at one level, so I'm thinking about like, we're placing the expectation on students who may not have issues to be supporting ones who do. Okay, that it seems to work in that class, and it's how the real world is. Like, we have to figure out how to navigate that. On the other hand, sometimes issues of neurodiversity, they're not visible. People around you don't know. Sometimes you don't even know yourself, but people don't know. And frequently, in a sort of interpersonal way, they can be difficult to work with. And so that can test the limits of personal generosity if you don't understand what you're navigating. And I have also to your comments, I have worked with students with disclosed disabilities and had those kind of conversations about how can we work around things. At the same time, I feel like I'm placing a responsibility on the person, that obligation on the person who needs the accommodation to tell me how to do it. Like, that doesn't feel like the responsibility is in the right place. And also, there is a power difference between me as a faculty member and my student, who is still going to say probably yes to everything. If they have a really good relationship with someone in the Students with Disabilities Office, there may be opportunity for some help in the communication. I have benefited from using universal design principles as much as possible and trying to think about how that applies to the classroom. That's probably even a really ripe area for this kind of teaching. But I am, it's a whole other conversation, and I don't mean this as a criticism, but it's an area of tremendous concern. I felt like the positive suggestions you were making, I don't think you meant to gloss over it, but it's a huge concern. And I think that what works frequently for students who may be neurodiverse or adults tends to work for everybody, but we have to step back and think really critically, and that's hard. So thank you. That was both, a comment.
I just want to acknowledge that, and I agree. I mean, I think that I try to think about my class design and the spaces we work in from the principle of universal design. But as we also know from disability studies, there's an interesting tension between universal design and specific design, and I think that that's exactly the challenge to think about. I do also, because I don't do exams, I don't do any of the things that students usually have accommodations for. So all of those accommodate letters that I get, I contact the student, I said, this is a weird class, how can I make this work for you? And it's true that it may invite a sense of putting the burden on them, but I think that communication is better than the old way, bring your visa letters to the front of the class so everybody can see who's got an accommodation. We don't do that anymore. And then I asked them to sort of, when I talk to them, I tried to talk about the ways in which that we're on a continuum where everybody has challenges. So trying to get everybody to understand that college is hard in lots of different ways, and people with disabilities are both special and not special. Like, we all have those challenges. So I try to have, without personalizing it, in a classroom conversation about it generally, and then I try to have a personal conversation with individual students and say, how can I make this work for you? And it's worked pretty well, but again, it's impossible to know the ways in which power and hierarchy and expectations work. So I agree that it's a longer conversation to have, not just about TBL or not just about teaching, but in general about our campus.
I have also removed the things that people typically need accommodations for, and have found the whole teaching experience, the learn to work much, much better. You had also made a comment about, someone made a comment about the way in which many University of Michigan students get here, sort of knowing how to get the right answer, and they struggle with not knowing what that is. I think a lot of the students who are coming with different ranges of neurodiversity are coming with lots of really bad experiences in navigating education accommodations, and they may have an incredible sense of relief in the kinds of environments and communications talking about?
There's an assumption that the students are traditional students. I had a student who's a parent. We have students who are working. They may not be able to do assignments at night. And so I'm wondering, have you encountered any of those challenges and how you dealt with them?
I put a big priority in teams being able to get all the work they need to do together done in section or lecture. And build that into part of the communication at the beginning of the course, that if you use your time efficiently in section, you shouldn't have to meet outside of class. When there are conflicts with teams, it's almost always about them deciding they have to meet some evening, some weekend time, and so can't make it. And you're absolutely right, there are people that have built in obstacles in their home life, in their caregiving. They can't just meet at 9 p.m. with the other undergraduates. So we have some language about that too in the syllabus. I think on neurodiversity, those SSD generic letters are completely unhelpful. At best, they open up the beginning of a conversation, although, students don't always reply when we try to start those conversations, and they come with their limitations and power dynamics. In the context of today's topic, I think the message that Mika was trying to get across and that I would underscore is that team-based learning can be used as an ally in starting to think about these questions. It doesn't multiply the problems. If anything, it'll help. When I start my teams, I often have in the survey process, and when the students before the semester realize they're going to be in a team, I'll have a certain number of students who are eager rabbits, and they'll send me an email saying, I want to be the leader of my team. I said, well, that's actually not what teams are about. It's not about being the leader. It's not a leadership. We don't have leaders of the teams. It's about learning to listen to your team members, particularly team members who are different from yourself and that feed diverse points of view into the final product of the team. And that message is conveyed in a number of different metacognitive exercises throughout the early parts of the semester. Not all students get it. Some students just come with more grace in situations like this. But to the extent that you're thinking about accommodation and TBL, I think TBL quickly becomes an ally rather than making accommodation responses harder.
Now you have already almost answered my question. I'm Kai Cortina from psychology. Now I have to first give a shout out to Mika, because I took a class, Jesse and I were in a class from CLRT this term on how to change large lecture classes, and I got into that because I was so interested in game-based learning, and I watched Mika's class, and I have to say now I'm more interested in the team-based. So my reform of my class is the 150 student class is more, I'm totally now sold on the team-based when I saw how it worked, despite the fact that we never debriefed, but it was I think it feels good that the small groups are kind of teams within the groups. The gamification or the game-based stuff is that's too complicated for me. And you said this in that class. You said, this is complicated. We have to figure this out with the GSI. So I'm more convinced, that really team-based learning is a real great way of avoiding what I know as an educational psychologist, that what students take away what they learn from lecture is so low. The efficacy of lecture classes is low, and the team-based learning is what I think really helps. So I was wondering, my course has, it's a 1 hour section. So do you think it's a good idea to have then the groups in sections also together, so that I have 4 groups and then in sections? And the question is then, what is it? How do I change, or how the GSIs will change what they do in section if these are, let's say they have 4 groups of 5 people in section?
Yes, I think it's, if you want to do team-based learning, keeping the teams the same in discussion section. And I think whenever you do creative pedagogy and change the conventional lecture in any way, the division of labor between discussion, conventional discussion and lecture becomes an interesting one. There's no easy answer, but on a team-based logic, I think the teams have to be the same. There can be non-team work in discussion sections, but I think if you go full bore with the team approach, they have to be the same in discussion section. But again, groups were mentioned earlier. You can do valuable group work. Groups are not bad. It's just that they're different. So, but I'm with George. We both do that in our classes, that they stay the same.
My discussion sections became somewhat less useful because what a GSI might do in a discussion section, working in a small group, we were doing that in lecture. So it wasn't as much incentive. So I kind of took my time. We have a big class with lots of meeting credits for the number of credits students actually earn. So I took the discussion sections as a time where students absolutely can come talk to a GSI, ask questions, and almost run them more like office hours. And so the GSIs do almost office hours in there. And I know that every student can make at least one of those, and they're not required. There's no points or incentive to go to discussions, so the attendance is low enough. But that allows the students to kind of attend at any one of those times, and I know they're 100% guaranteed, because they signed up for it in theory, to be able to make one of those times. So they can't use the argument, we can't make office hours. I'm like, well, you signed up for a time, you knew that was the meeting time. So I've sort of taken the discussions out, and we do the work in class and then use that as an office hour time. So a little different approach.
All right. Well, thank you all for sharing your experiences. And I know I learned some things about great strategies in the classroom. And thank you all for coming at the end of a stressful semester and spending some time and thinking about this. If anyone's interested in team-based learning, we're here. You can talk to the learning consultants. We can tell you more. And your fellow faculty colleagues here, I'm sure, would also be willing to share more. So thank you.